Hello, this is another recording for the Suffolk Jungian Circle. This month's topic for discussion at the meeting in a few days' time is the sensation type, the third of the three types. Four altogether, but we're up to number three, so there's one more type to go next month. So this is just a delve into the sensation type so that anyone participating in the discussion, if bits of it you're familiar with possibly, you've got a chance to reflect on the ideas, the concepts, as well as doing your own background reading and so on. And of course, there may be people who are not part of the Suffolk Jungian group who nonetheless would be interested in hearing about Jung's sensation type. So to start with, just a quick overview of what the sensation type is. So we've looked at the thinking type and the feeling type already. People who operate heavily through their intellect or heavily through their emotions. The sensation type is very grounded in their own body. Sight, taste, smell, sound, etc., the various physical sensations. And that is their chief route, if you like, their chief medium by which they try to understand the world. Now, there has been a tendency which Jung, in his own lifetime, his own writings, refuted, in that a lot of people had started to assume that the sensation type might be a little bit thick, as in somebody who's just kind of stuffing their face and enjoying their body, the pleasures of the body, with very little intellect, very little emotional depth, and so forth. He wanted to say, and did say, that is not the case. That sensation types can be just as clever and imaginative and inventive as anybody else. It's just their approach to life is different. So the route by which they go down is distinct. And chiefly, it's quite a practical focus on life. So their wish to understand the world around them, which sits in contrast to the polar opposite quality, which is the intuitive personality, which is the one we'll look at next month. Whilst the intuitive person has lots of leaps of imagination and is sort of very inclined to live in a world of their own dreaming, a bit of a fantasy world, the sensation type is much more worldly, much more grounded, if you can put it like that, in that their understanding is based around physical fact. Can they see it? Can they smell it? Can they touch it? Can they taste it? Therefore, it exists. So if we pick a random subject, let's say ghosts, for argument's sake, the intuitive person, they don't need to have seen a ghost in order to imagine that such a thing might exist, and be able to kind of generate a mental world in which ghosts become a reality, and they can sort of grasp the implications of their existence purely within their own imagination. The sensation person might believe in ghosts, but they're only likely to do so if they've seen something or heard something or whatever that they then think of as a ghost. So if they've got no sensation to base the belief on, they're profoundly unlikely to have that belief. If they haven't seen it, they haven't heard it, and I'm sure people might be listening to this who would say, well, even if they have seen a ghost, they're deluded because there's no such thing as ghosts. From the that is what you might, or Jung might suggest as a more thinking approach, to have an intellectual rationale about what does and doesn't exist, which is based upon thought out ideas rather than immediate personal experience. Whereas the sensation person, their understanding of the world is based upon their physical experience of the world. So the intellectual person might say, well, you think you've seen a ghost. However, the thinking person, I should say, might say to somebody, well, you think you've seen a ghost, but it wasn't this, it was that. It was, explain it away, rationalize it away as a misleading sensation that they didn't really see what they thought they saw. The sensation type person is less inclined to all of that sort of intellectualization. They're much more likely to say, I've seen something which is X, therefore I believe in X. Conversely, they might say, I haven't seen something, therefore I don't believe in it, because I've never seen it, I've never had experience of it, why should I? believe in its existence. They're much more grounded in the experiences of their own body. Now, that can lead, and certainly when we're thinking about the extrovert type and the introvert types of these qualities can go out into the world or turn within. The extrovert type is often very, well, both types really, but more so a little bit with the extrovert type, very grounded in observing the world. They're very observant. I can imagine maybe, say, somebody like Sherlock Holmes, who look at a bit of cigarette ash or a nail or a footprint in the mud or whatever, and start deducing things based upon their sensations. Um, he would, he'd probably be a thinking type predominantly, but maybe his secondary quality would be sensation, because he was somebody very much aware of the physical world around him. And sensation types do tend to pay a lot of attention to sights and sounds and smells. So they're arguably career-wise things like that. They might be artists, painters, musicians, cooks, chefs, people for whom physical sensation is something they're very good at. They have a very, the wine taster. I like wine, obviously, no blush. But if I drink a glass of wine, either I like it or I don't. That's it. I couldn't tell you which vintage it was. I couldn't tell you whether it's a Chablis or a whatever else. It's just like I don't have the palate of an experienced wine taster who can have a sip and say, "Oh, that's a Medoc from 1973." Possibly, if I went on a course and learned how to do it, I could acquire that. I don't know, maybe. But some people are so attuned to their physical sensations that they can pick up on things. The closest I can get in my own experience is because I like painting. I like to paint. I can look at a picture and say, well, that's scarlet or that's vermilion. I can tell one shade of red from another, one shade of green from another. There are other people who I met that will look at a thing and say, oh, it's green, it's red, it's blue. That's it. One shade of blue is much the same as any other. One shade of green is much the same as any other. They may notice that one blue is a bit brighter and another blue is a bit darker, but they can sort of narrow it down to quite what type of blue it is, quite what shade of green it is, quite what spectrum of yellow it is. They don't go into that level of detail, which generally speaking I can do because I spend a lot of time faffing around with paints, so I get used to the names of the different hues within paint ranges. A little bit I can go along with it, even if in other areas like wine tasting it just goes over my head entirely. But there are obviously a variety of careers, a variety of hobbies and interests and so forth, which are very much based in one of the physical sensations of the body. And so the sensation, they may be more inclined to taste than they are to sound, or more inclined to touch than they are to smell, but they will be quite grounded in their senses generally, even if perhaps one of them is more prominent as their preferred sense that they go through. So that tends to be their métier of understanding the world and how they go through the world. There's an inclination to practicality. Jung talks about people being very kind of sensible, earthed, organising things. They're very logical, very practical. Often have quite practical skills. So people who are very good at carpentry and plumbing and electrics and what have you, they can make things and assemble them and repair them, and they're very good at sort of the visual spatial skills that come with when you're trying to, let's say, put together a piece of furniture from a flat pack. Some people they just kind of go to pieces. It's all a bit too much. But the sensation type could think, oh well, that bit clearly slots into that bit, and that bit fits up there, and this bit goes around there, because their minds work very well with shape and form, how things fit together at a very practical, very sensible level. So they're great people to have around in terms of getting things done. The thinking type can live so much in their own head that their house is an absolute tip. There's washing, piled up in the sink from weeks ago. There's ironing that's been sitting there for 3 months, hasn't been done. The cockroaches have walked out and discussed it, so filthy. They're not necessarily very engaged at a practical level in maintaining home and body and needs and so on. I think one of the previous recordings we spoke about that stereotype of the absent-minded professor who's not eaten for 2 days because they've been so lost in some train of thought. They're just thinking about sticking food in their body doesn't manifest into their consciousness for a period of time. The sensation person eats regularly. They maintain their body. It doesn't necessarily automatically mean they're super duper fit and healthy, because they could obviously just eat so damn much they end up the size of a sofa and get terribly unhealthy. But they maintain their physical needs very well, and so that they go into that level. The extrovert type can perhaps be more at risk of ending up the size of a sofa than the introvert type, in that can lead to potentially a very sybaritic approach to life, very pleasure bent, where they're chasing after lots of physical sensations, too much booze, too much food, indiscriminate sex that leaves them vulnerable to infections and Lord knows what else. Too much of everything. Tendency. There was a TV series from was it 80s, 90s? I forget when it was, called Cracker, which was a detective program featuring Robbie Coltrane as the lead detective. And Robbie back then, at least, Robbie Coltrane was not only very tall but very, very big, very rotund guy. And part of the character was that he ate too much, he drank too much, I am too much. That was his whole, it was in a Scottish accent, but that was his whole kind of defining character, that whatever he did to excess, he did to grandiose measures. And he was, again, like the Sherlock Holmes example, he could look at things and spot clues and material evidence and put it all together in his mind. So very centered in his body in that way, centered in sensation, his own and other people. Jung makes a brief mention of health-related issues when he's talking about the sensation type. He says that they're more likely to end up with problems with their skeleton, their bone structure, and their muscles, their musculature structure. Part of it is the notion that muscles and bones are obviously the structural elements of the body. It's what stops us from turning into a blob of jelly wobbling around on the floor. It gives us structure and form. And the sensation types really like structure and form. They don't like chaos and disorder and mayhem. If a sensation type person is going on holiday, they'll have booked it 6 months in advance. They'll know exactly what plane, what train, what time. They'll have worked out in their own mind precisely what they need to pack. They'll know where their passport is. Everything will be organised, probably even to the point where they'll have a very clear itinerary that when I arrive at my holiday destination on the Monday, I'm going to do this, and on the Tuesday, I'm going to do that. And everything is very structured, very organised. There are other types who would just wake up one morning and think, great, I'm going to go on holiday, and jump on the nearest train and end up wherever the hell they'd end up, with very little planning and probably having left their toothbrush and their passport and Lord knows what else at home, because they're not very organised and they're not very planned. That is not the sensation type. They are very, very structured. But that structure can become excessive, and that's what he's talking about with the health issues, that they can become too rigid, too fixated, too orderly, rather like Freud's notion of the anally retentive personality, who's so neat, so organised, so structured. Everything is pristine and in its place, and not a hair out of place in their appearance, not a spoon out of place in the kitchen. Everything is just so, to the point where it could easily drive their friends and family round the bend, because they're too anal, they're too structured, they're too rigid, they're too inflexible. They can't cope with even a little bit of spontaneity, even a little bit of what to them feels like absolute chaos, which is much more the intuitive type, the one that kind of, oh, let's go and do this, oh, let's go and do that, and they're rushing off here, there, and everywhere, and are not necessarily terribly organised in how they go about doing the things that they want to do, but they probably have a lot of fun and enjoyment whilst doing it, because it's, for them, a spontaneity and just winging it is part of the pleasure, whereas the sensation type wants order and structure and everything just so. And now, in previous recordings, we talked about this idea of anandromia, that the forces that are undeveloped in a personality keep bubbling to the surface and demanding that the individual pay attention to them, often bubbling up in very negative, unpleasant, trying sorts of ways that the person finds very difficult to cope with. The longer they go ignoring it, the harder it is to cope with those issues until it sort of life slaps the person in the kisser and says, right now, pay attention. Have to deal with them. So for the heavily sensation based person, it's that underlying sense of chaos. It probably doesn't feel like spontaneity to them because they're more likely to see it in a negative context. Mayhem, disorder, chaos, bubbling away outside. You know, the barbarians at the gates, as it were, hammering to be let in, and the fear that everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket if it's not all precisely organised and structured. Kind of individuals who maybe get involved in committees and groups and things like that, and they have to follow the rules down to the very last paragraph, the very last subclause, scrutinise everything. It's all got to be precise. And there are some jobs where that level of precision would be a real advantage. Yeah, laboratory-based jobs, perhaps, or anything where you've got to follow a procedure and a process, and you can't afford to be sloppy, you can't afford to make mistakes, you can't afford to be too slapdash in your approach because it has to be just so. Which is, a great advantage if you've got one of those types of jobs. But if your whole life becomes that rigid, then it's suffocating for you and it's suffocating for the people around you. Underlying it is that fear of what will happen if I relax, what will happen if I don't follow the rules, what will happen if I do try and do something spontaneous, it will go to hell in a handbasket. And that's what the heavily sensation type person needs to come to terms with to integrate a bit more freedom, a bit more spontaneity, a bit more flexibility into their life so they can cope with just running off at the last minute and doing unplanned things and have a bit of fun without it all feeling like it's mental torture for them being dragged onto such excursions. The introverted type takes their sensations inside. They're very aware of their own bodily processes. They're very conscious of their own health, which commentators, writers, and so on have suggested can frequently key into things like psychosomatic disorders, where mental, emotional problems and issues are transformed into bodily symptoms, bodily problems. There's no actual virus, there's no actual germ, there's no actual injury, but the body starts manifesting issues. Freud spoke about hysteria, and he felt this was a singularly female kind of an issue, which I don't think many people these days would say is singularly female. I don't statistically, I don't know if the percentage of people manifesting psychosomatic disorders is higher for women, higher for men, or 50-50. But clearly there are plenty of men who get psychosomatic issues, so it's not just a feminine thing the way that Freud described it as being. But he talks about people with paralysis, with various kind of bodily issues, where he, being a doctor, went along, examined their body, and said, "There's nothing actually wrong with you. It's all in your head. Effectively, you think you're paralysed, you think you've got this, you think you've got that, but you don't actually have it." So these were malingerers pretending to have illness. They genuinely were convinced in their own mind they had all of these bodily problems, but it was the result of an emotional state. Rather than any germ or virus or injury or whatever to their body. So there is that tendency to get maybe a bit hypochondriac, maybe a bit over obsessed with your own body, and I think increasingly maybe fixation on dietary issues. So people whose diets get more and more obscure, more and more pernickety, they're a large amount of their time and energy is focused on can't eat this, can't eat that, can't eat the other, having more and more difficult to meet food requirements, not because they necessarily have horrific allergies that will kill them off, but because they've got belief systems or they've read a book saying the thing is unhealthy, therefore you should avoid it, and they take on board lots and lots of ideas which make their body and what goes into their body and the state of health of their body the end all and be all of their existence. They spend inordinate amounts of time on it. That's a rather extreme example of introverted sensation, but it's where someone could potentially end up if they get out of hand. Milder versions is that tendency to pedantry, very, again, fixation with rules and how things have got to be done, how things have got to be said, need for structure, but internalized structure. I have to do this in this way. The external is more about structuring other people, structuring the wider world around them, whereas the internalized individual, the introverted individual, is more focused on structuring themselves, their own mind, their own life, doing things in a very certain way. There can be an element of materialism going on here, a strong attachment to physical objects. People who love collecting stamps, teapots, mats, whatever it is that they collect, that they are emotionally invested in objects. And everyone is to some extent. You have your grandmother's ring or something that's got a lot of sentimental value. But that's more of a feeling approach. To have the emotional investment, that object belonged to so and so person. Therefore, I keep that object to remind me of the person I love. Whereas the sensation type is there's not necessarily a great emotional investment. It's not that beer that was owned by your great uncle Fred or anything like that. It's just the need to have objects around to occupy the mind thinking about objects, their provenance, how you acquired them, what their history is, where they fit into the great schema of teapots or beer mats or stamps or whatever collecting media it happens to be. Potentially, you do, of course, have, in very, very rare and extreme cases, risk of someone whose predilection for objects gets so intense that they become a hoarder and they're just surrounding themselves with tons of crap everywhere. Of no particular significance or value. They just get to the point of mind where they struggle to let go of objects and release things. Not necessarily things to which they have emotional attachments. It could be 50 weeks worth of newspapers that are piling up in the corner. They're not emotionally attached to the newspapers. They just cannot bring themselves to part with objects. So material world around them, they can't part with it, they can't part with that. So that there's that need for holding on to things, which can become quite pronounced for some people, but very extreme cases, obviously. But even at milder cases, there is that love of the physical world and attachment to the physical world. I suspect part of that can also lead to people liking stability. Not that there's anything wrong with liking stability, but liking, let's say, continuity. So can well be a resistance to change. Some people love change. Every 5 minutes they're doing something different. Whereas the sensation type is much more likely to. So I like the world the way it is. I like these fashions, these foods, this music, blah blah. And I want it to continue. I don't want to have new fashions, new fads, new. I don't like change. I want the world to stay the way it is. And I wish something I can sympathise with to an extent because I like particular woodlands that I walk the dog, and if it was something announced that one of them was going to be chopped down and turned into a supermarket, I would be quite upset by that because I want that woodland to still be there even when I'm 90 years old, even when I'm dead and gone and no longer around to notice. I want it to still be there. I don't like the idea of what to me seems a needless change or a distracting change. Some people would be less prospect. There is a sort of an element of nostalgia, but a nostalgia rooted in routines, rooted in objects, rooted in things staying the way they are, remaining stable, and therefore not needing to learn a new setup. And I think part of that, from Jung's perspective, is this love of structure and order. That I know how the world works now, and a bit like me, every time they introduce a new computer system at work, I think it's taken me 6 bloody years to get used to the old system, and now suddenly you've got a new one for me to get used to. And I get quite annoyed at that because I struggle to cope with changes in technology. I'm just not up to date enough with these things. Um, I'm not sure that's probably something you can put down to factors other than sensation, personality type. Yeah, liking things to stay the way they are, and that applies also and even, should I say, to situations that are not necessarily pleasant ones. So somebody can be stuck in a really crappy, boring job or a really miserable relationship, and there are opportunities for them to get a new job or dump the relationship and meet somebody new, but they won't do it because they go, well, they're used to it. So even though maybe their boss is a bit of a toad, or their other half is a bully or a nag or violent or drunk or whatever, they'd sooner stick with the thing they're used to. They know how it works. They know the routines. They know what's expected of them, rather than risk having to get used to something brand new. And so that can, obviously, in terms of unhealthy attachments, that can become a problem, as well as the more healthy forms of attachment. Um, they're good at preserving traditions. That's the flip side, is that they've got a great love of tradition. Many religions and cultures have huge quantities of traditional food, traditional festivals, traditional dress, this, that, the other. Who are the people who keep these things going generation to generation? Who are the people who still make the same recipes that their granny used to make? Who are the people that keep the baby clothes that were first knitted by great grandmother 100 years ago? It's the sensation people. They keep their traditions going. They keep them, pass them on to the next generation. And without them, we'd lose most of these traditions. Um, where would museums be without people who were attached to bits of old broken pottery and rusty old swords and wanting to keep the material culture of past generations preserved and studied and understood and treated as objects worth knowing about, rather than just slinging everything into the bin? Because obviously the opposite of this is the throwaway culture that has no attachment to anything material. You've got the phone for a new mobile phone for a month or two. Oh, ditch it because there's a new model. Buy the latest fashions, wear them once, ditch it. There's a new fashion now. No attachment to anything. That's obviously, from a Buddhist perspective, attachment is often a very problematic thing to be overcome. The danger of not having any attachments at all is that you have a total throwaway culture where nothing matters to anyone. So here 1 minute, gone the next. Who the hell cares? And that's not really a healthy way to live at all. A tendency towards possessiveness is also noted, kind of emotional possessiveness. The feeling type can be like that as well. Children with their toys who don't like sharing their toys is mine. So there's a tendency to hold on to things, whether there is an emotional attachment or a financial attachment. This is expensive, is mine. You can't have it. It doesn't necessarily boil down to that, but it is attachment to things for the sake of having them. And I suppose, in some sense, the miser, Ebenezer Scrooge, is a very archetypal example of miserliness. He holds on to his fortune. He doesn't do anything with it. He doesn't spend it. He doesn't have a luxurious lifestyle of exotic holidays and flash food and jewellery and all the rest of it. He's got all of this money stuffed in his coffers and does nothing with it. He just wants it for the sake of having it, not because it is useful in any way. There is a risk of that kind of approach developing, where people have things for the sake of having them. It gives them a sense of permanence, sense of belonging, or whatever, but not necessarily doing anything with them. In the same way that a lot of people who go and teapots don't necessarily drink a hell of a lot of tea. They're not using those teapots on a daily basis. They're there to look at rather than to do anything with. Um, there must be some people who do use their teapots, but that tends to have things that you've got no real use for, but you want them. That can include people, a possessiveness of people, as well as a possessiveness of physical objects. Last bit I'll mention, because I'm waffling a bit now, again, coming back to this notion of the undeveloped inferior function. The undeveloped intuitive function can lead, according to some commentators, to the heavily sensation type person having some very odd, weird, superstitious beliefs underpinning their supposedly very practical, very earthly, very common sense approach to life. Because that intuitive bit is undeveloped, and therefore it goes to the negative. It becomes a destructive force. And so they can have weird conviction. And I suppose maybe thinking about conspiracy theories, maybe something like that, where people get very weird fixations on lizards running the planet, or Zionist conspiracy, whatever weird thing it is that they've got in there, which they may. And I have had kind of experience of this. In that a long time ago, I had a job teaching 16-year-olds, 16, 17-year-olds. And a lot of them would, if you got onto the subject of talking about world religions, because we covered a lot of different subjects, they go, all religion, load of rubbish, don't believe in God, only stupid people believe in God, and there's always nonsense. Where's the proof? And 2 breaths later, they'd be telling me about how they'd seen their grandmother's ghost, and they believed in Martians and the rest of it. Not that I'm, quite happy for people to believe in ghosts and aliens. I've got no problem with that. But they're shifting from not believing in one thing because there's no material evidence to definitely believing in another thing, despite there being no material evidence. So it is the double standard that struck me as quite odd. To my mind, none of the subjects being talked about had the kind of concrete, earthy material evidence they were prizing. But one set of the Martians are here and running everything belief, okay. Believing in Buddha, Allah, Christ, whoever, total pants, total rubbish. No evidence for it. And it is that oddity that struck me, and that I think is a bit of a reflection of it. That people who regard themselves as very earthy, very sensible, very practical, I only believe in what my senses show me, I don't believe in any of this mumbo jumbo cobbler's stuff, can nonetheless have some really weird, unevidenced, if I can call it that, beliefs going on under the surface. They often are unaware themselves that those particular beliefs lack evidence. In their mind, there is absolute proof that the Pope is a 12-foot lizard from another dimension. Absolutely, they believe that because they saw it on a website. They heard it on YouTube from whoever. That to them is absolute proof, whereas to many other people, that would be fundamentally lacking in proof, lacking in evidence, plausible evidence at any rate. So it is that weirdness that's going on there that the very practical, nonetheless have these odd, undeveloped, unexplored corners of gullibility, if I can put it like that. But I think I'll leave that there. Next month we'll get on to the final of the 4 personality types, the intuitive, and after that we'll move on to other subjects and possibly other people within the Jungian Circle might want to do recordings for some of the things. It doesn't have to be me all the time, but I'll leave that option there. And if anyone's got any thoughts or questions, see you in the circle discussion, some of you, and maybe have chats by email and commentary and whatnot for others who are not members of the circle but are interested.